Thanks for joining us today, guys. Today we are joined by Marvin Storm. Marvin has a lot of experience in the franchise world, a lot of experience in exiting businesses, has his own successful podcast as well. And so happy to have him on today's show to share a little bit about his journey and experience.
Well,
Uh,
I'm just excited to be here. Can't wait to get going here.
Thanks, Marvin. Can you, as we get started, can you introduce yourself to the audience and maybe give them a little bit of your background that makes you the expert you are?
Well, sure. Probably like a lot of your audience, got started, in whatever business they're in, kind of by chance. I got my degree in accounting and worked for a large, national accounting firm. And in a pickup basketball game, I went every Tuesday night for a couple of hours. I met a guy and we started chatting, and before you know it, we turned in our resignations and had decided to go into our own business. And we got a small office in downtown and got a couple of desks and a couple of phones, and we were off to the races. And spent that's kind of how I got into business. Was in that business, had a good run for about 10 years. And as partnerships often go, he wanted to go right and I wanted to go left. And our goals and objectives changed over the time we were together. And we eventually decided that we would step away from that business. And that's when I got involved in franchising. I had the business was equipment leasing. And I had done some equipment leasing for some franchise-based companies, and I was just really intrigued with the whole franchise model. And one thing led to another, and I ended up, becoming a franchisee, then a regional franchisee, then a franchisor in a couple of different concepts, and built up several businesses in that world. And a few years ago, stepped away from that, and thought I would just take it easy, enjoy life. And as things often go, when you're spend so many years in the fast lane, with the pedal to the metal, so to speak, and all of a sudden you're over at the slow lane and maybe even parked on the side of the road. It isn't as exciting as you're kind of used to. And so I got to thinking about the different businesses I had been involved in, and how the time came to sell those businesses. And each time I went through that process, I really didn't know what I didn't know, because everyone was progressively different and a little bit different scale. And I thought, there's probably a lot of other entrepreneurs out there, people that have founded businesses or bought a business, and they get to that point where they want to monetize all their hard work. And since entrepreneurs get really good at what they do, because they do it every day, all day long, for years, sometimes decades. But when it comes to exiting a business, you get maybe once or maybe twice to stand at the plate and swing at the ball. And you don't really get good at it, or you don't know some of the potholes that you're going to hit. And so I decided I love podcasting. I listen to podcasts all the time. So I decided to start a podcast. And I love stories and lessons from stories of other people. And so I started the Business Exit Stories podcast, where I interview deal makers, the mergers and acquisition specialists, the wealth managers, the investment bankers, CPAs, attorneys, whoever is involved in kind of the transaction flow of making a deal happen. And they bring their war stories to the podcast. They're good ones, where people have done well and why, and some transactions they've been involved in that didn't go very well, and sometimes not well at all, and why did that outcome happen. And so every podcast has 4, kind of Reader's Digest versions of actual transactions and the takeaways. And it's been a phenomenal experience. And so that's kind of what I'm doing today. And it's just been great to talk to all these professionals out there and learn about all of the different permeations of what can go right or wrong in an exit.
Do the stories make you want to jump back in and start up again? Or are you happy with where you're at?
Uh, there's always that longing and yearning, but at this point in my career, I found this new passion really that pulling together my experiences, and then especially when I've had hundreds of these stories and transactions that I hear, it just amazes me of all of the things that an entrepreneur should know that they just really don't get a chance to know about, because these only happen at the time you're getting ready to exit or during the exit process, and sometimes after the exit process of how the deal has been structured. That if they knew what could happen, they would have probably done things differently, but it sounded good at the time. Carrying back some of the sales price that you're talked into doing, and all the conditions and terms that involves, and what may sound like a good idea that will give you a little bit higher price for your business may not be a good idea after all, especially if you're dealing with people that do this every day, all day long, and you're dealing with, private equity or people that acquire businesses as a matter of routine. They will structure those, earnouts, as they're called, or the carrybacks to their benefit, and not necessarily the person that's carrying the paperback.
Shocking.
Yeah, shocking. But
Um,
it can sound good at the time, let me tell you.
well, I'm sure they're great at putting the spin on it, right? To make it hit whatever those short-term needs or emotional highs are for, the entrepreneurs who are selling, who, to your point, have one or two reps versus hundreds, right? It's just not an equitable playing field.
It is not an equitable playing field many times.
I want to go back a little bit. So you had started up your own company, you had owned your own company with a partner, and then you had gone kind of the franchise route. And then it seems like you stayed in the franchise route. So, what attracted you to kind of that franchise model and becoming an expert in that space?
Well, I went through a time when I built my own business. You start out with a couple of guys and you build it up to 60, 70 people, from a single office to an whole floor, where you have all these people and responsibilities, and you have a CFO, and you have tech people, and everything that you're doing is on the fly. You're learning as you're going on the job. And when I stepped away from that business, and because I had dealt, some of our clients were franchise-based companies, and I just became intrigued with the model of somebody else figuring out the business model, testing it, refining it, and then having other people execute it. And it's really the application. I mean, franchising is really nothing more than a method of a company, in this case a franchisor, to leverage their brand and their expertise by using other people's human resources and financial resources to expand the brand. And when you get the alignment of the energies and entrepreneurial spirit of a franchise partner in a specific geographical area, executing and implementing a specific business model, and then you have the franchisor who's kind of the scout on the horizon, keeping an eye out for competition and evolving economic conditions, and fine-tuning the business model while you're executing in your local market. It can be a great partnership. The real trick is finding the right franchise company that knows what they're doing. Not all franchise companies do. They're learning as they're going too, and you just got to make sure that they have the management talent and the ability to keep the concept fresh while you deploy that concept in your own area that you live in. So it can be a great marriage when it works, and when it works well.
So as you were going through, your own business, and you started getting to that point where you're making profit, and you don't have to worry about food on the table or roof over the head, and you've got, extra income. How did you think about, and what was your framework, at the time, in where you put that capital? And as we fast forward to now, looking back, right, are there things you've learned along the way that you would do differently if you were to go back in time and look at it?
Well, that's a great question. And I think as you reflect back and when you discuss those type of questions, it depends from my perspective anyway, it depends a little bit of your age, of where you're at in your career, in your entrepreneurial journey. Early in my career, I was impervious to risk. The reason I walked away from a good career, I was willing to take the risk. I had a young family, a couple, 3 kids at the time, a mortgage and all the things that are attendant to that. And you walk away from that paycheck and you go for almost a year, in my case, without any money, any income at all. And you're living off and you see the bank balance dwindling away. And, that didn't bother me at the time. As you get a little bit older and you have experiences where you've tried things and things don't work out, in the first business that I built, I spent a lot of money on things that didn't work. And every time that I did that and it didn't work out, and I saw the 6-figure, checks that I wrote on technology that we were trying to develop that didn't work out. And I found out that companies that we hired, got us hooked, and it was, feature creep in the technology we're trying to build. And we ended up, flushing a lot of money down the toilet. And when you have those experiences, it gives you perspective of what I could have done, what I should have done, and how I should have responded and reacted in those situations. So over the years, you gain these nicks in your armor and a thick skin, and your perspective starts to change. So early in my career, I really poured everything right back into the business, and because on balance things worked out. Some things worked great, some things didn't work so great, but on balance, those invested dollars worked out. It's interesting to note that, as I, work now with founders and business owners that are trying to get to the point where they're going to monetize their hard work, when you look at their financial situation, there are studies that have been done where a traditional entrepreneur, business person, has over 70% of his net worth tied up into his business. And when you have that large of a component on your balance sheet, your personal balance sheet, sunk into one asset, you better do a great job on an exit, if that's where your money is at. And most people, interestingly enough, they will spend, dozens, if not hundreds of hours and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars researching a new product or a new business they're thinking of getting into, or whatever the circumstances are. But they never give us 10 minutes thought to how they're going to get out of the business. So they'll think about all of the things up front, but never on the back end of how they're going to monetize that decade or two of hard work and be able to time their exit appropriately. Because entrepreneurs, in my opinion, because entrepreneurs are this rare breed of personality traits that, get their excitement from trying to figure things out. And they like to be able to identify a problem, assess it, figure out a solution, and execute, and seeing the results of their action in real time. And they become really good at that. But when it comes to monetizing their exit and doing that, they think that they're going to do the same thing when it comes time to sell their company. It doesn't work that way. I wish it did. And sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you can do that. But on balance, 80-90% of the folks that try that belly flop, and they don't do a great job at it. And because so much of your net worth is tied up into your business, you need to have a little bit more attention paid to that, so you can actually turn those assets and that goodwill and the value that you've built into hard cash when you exit, and leverage that and get a great return on all that hard work.
So you had mentioned, it sounds like you poured a lot back into the business. A lot of that is probably illiquid for the majority of the investments or what you're pouring it back into, right? Or capital expenditure, I would imagine. And so you're prepping for this exit, right? And that's going to be kind of the big payday. I'm assuming, salary probably increases, steadily as the business continues to do well, but pouring more and more back into the business. What are some of those things? You've gone through a multitude of exits. You've talked to hundreds of people who have gone through exits. What are some of those things that entrepreneurs should be considering to maximize their exit plan?
Well, I'll come back to a comment I made early in my career, and I'm sure this is true with a lot of the people listening here. You don't think about what's going to happen down the road, because that's 20, 30 years down the road. And I was in my 20s when I started my first business. And, so you don't think a lot about that. And, but, 10, 20 years down the road, I thought a lot about that. And as I see the trend or the patterns of people that are exiting their businesses, it seems to be, the same type of thing that I went through. Most folks that sail their own ship and build their own companies tend to go through a similar type of learning curve or kind of pattern. Is that early in their career, they pour everything back into their business and don't think a lot about an exit. And then at some point in time, they start thinking about it. And that's what I did. I started thinking about how I was going to monetize that, primarily because I brought in outside capital to acquire a company. And, they have a certain, perspective on how they're going to get a return on their investment. And it was during that time frame in my career that I really was schooled on, specific timelines. When a private equity company comes in and invests in your business, that private equity company has a certain timeline that they're going to adhere to in most cases. And that gave me a real different perspective. And it was a healthy perspective. But, to address your question, directly, every entrepreneur, I think, should build assets outside of their business, because you don't want to be in a situation where you have 60, 70, 80% of your total net worth tied up into your business. And if something goes sideways on that, you don't want to be in a situation to have all of that hard work, sometimes decades of hard work, completely alter your reality if it doesn't work out.
So with your personal experience, did you start to do that with your first company, or was that a learning that came?
There are very few people, I think, I haven't met very many of them, that start early with that philosophy. I was young, I was brash, I thought I knew everything. It took me a while before I stopped believing my own press clippings, because we did very well very quickly. And I was way ahead of the curve, making six figures, a few years after I left the accounting world. I thought I was pretty hot stuff. And, that I had the Midas touch. When things didn't go well, it brought in perspective. So I think that everyone that is building a business and growing and scaling a company, regardless of the type of company it is, I think that, you go through these phases in your career and your attitude and your outlook on life. I think that's just part of the game. And what I've seen is that people, the earlier that happens in their career, the better off they are. Sometimes a good failure is the best thing that can happen to you. My biggest learning experiences and things that I tried and belly flopped on turned out to be real blessings down the road, because the next time I looked to see if there was water in the swimming pool before I jumped.
Funny how it has to be almost painful enough to learn the lesson, right?
Yeah.
If it's not painful enough, sometimes we don't learn.
Yeah, yeah, it's age old, axioms that tend to repeat over and over, and very little altering in, what the learnings can be and should be. So that's why stories are so great. And that's why I love the podcast that I'm doing, because it's all about stories and real situations that you don't want to make and step on those landmines, and you can learn from other people, because if you don't, you're going to make those mistakes, and you may lose a foot by stepping on those landmines, and you may not have enough time in your career to recover from that.
So as you were talking about diversifying outside of the company, what are some ways that you've done that over your career, and kind of where did you seek that kind of diversification?
Oh, traditionally, once we had the cash flow and I was responsible for other people, I had dozens of people working for me. You do the things that you should do, every entrepreneur should do, is take care of your people and develop your 401ks and benefits and things like that. And I rode right along with that and started, investing, for down the road, and, the more traditional investments and diversification and things of that nature that served me well, down the road.
When you had your first exit, and now you're probably sitting on a pile of cash and you're thinking what to do, did you already have the next idea ready to go, or did it take some time to go from that exit into the next thing for you?
I can remember very clearly my partner and I, as I said, we had kind of been in the right place at the right time. And I thought at the time that was because we were so smart. But it was really about timing and just having the right product at the right time. And we had people come to us for the solution. I can remember writing down on New Year's Eve day, around, the 31st of December, around 1 or 2 in the afternoon, riding down the elevator, and we had just kind of wrapped up the year, and we had a big bank balance. And we looked at each other and said, should we just take our money and run? Should we just cash out? It was we had had that option, but we kind of smiled and looked at each other and says, nah, no, we'll roll the dice. We'll grow it bigger. That was probably not a great decision, because the economy turned in the next year or two, and we took all that money and tried to come up with reigniting that growth that the economy had taken a toll on. But when we stepped away from the company, we did okay. But no, I didn't have any idea. As I said earlier, we decided that our goals and objectives had changed, and it often does with partners. He was older than I was. His family circumstances were different, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And it took some time, took about a year to figure out kind of what direction I was going to go in, and I had the flexibility to do that, and it worked out well.
So in that next one, did you take all the money and dump it right into the next idea, or did you at that time?
Absolutely, that's what entrepreneurs do. It was but much more cautiously. Not as haphazardly as I did the first time around. When you walk away from a good paying job and you have a mortgage and kids, and I look back and scratch my head, and I'm sure glad I had a great wife, and who was willing to ride that roller coaster with me. but I was much more cautious this time around, and much more contemplative. A little bit more thought went into that, the kind of the next venture, and consequently, it worked. Things happened differently and much more methodically than the wild, wild west of my first, business. And it was the wild, wild west. We were too stupid to know any differently.
But you had the Midas touch. Couldn't be stupid if you have the Midas touch.
I thought I did. I really did.
Um,
I was really arrogant back then, in my 20s, and making good money and driving the nice car and buying a new house and doing all the things that, foolish entrepreneurs do on their first taste of success. Yeah.
Was there ever a point where the cycle changed in terms of you've had many successful exits, right? So at the next exit, did you then just take all the money and pour it into the next company, or at what point did either the circumstances or your mentality or how your strategic thought process, did it ever change to say, okay, I'm taking this off the table and I'm only playing with X?
It's really a great question. When I actually acquired a company, and instead of doing it myself, I used other people's money. I brought in outside capital, and that changed the dynamics quite a bit. It wasn't now all my own money. You feel more responsible because you're taking other people's money, and you do things differently because now you're reporting to a board of directors and other people that you can't make the decisions just because you own the company. Yeah, you own a majority of the company, but you have other shareholders, stakeholders that you have to report to. So it changes your decision-making process and a lot differently. And it was at that point that I gained a greater appreciation for taking care of the people much at a greater level than I had in the past, that had got me to where I had gotten. And I wanted to retain key people and make sure that their investment in the company of their time was rewarded, and gave away equity in the company and things of that nature, as stock options, things like that. So,
as we're nearing the end of time here, Marvin, and wrapping up, any words of advice that you would give to kind of entrepreneurs around the topics we've been kicking around?
Well, I think that anyone that's listening in that has a substantial chunk of their net worth, and that's traditionally what happens with entrepreneurs that are founders that acquire a company, they devote a majority of their time, 6-7 days a week, 12-15 hours a day, building something, and it tends to be consuming, and it becomes a large component of their net worth. If that's your circumstances, then I think it behooves you really to give some thought about how you're going to monetize all that hard work. If you haven't built a lot of outside net worth outside of your business, you should probably think about that. If you have another 10-15 years or whatever the timeline is, build some equity outside, investments outside of your business. But if you're in that situation where you are 2, 3, 4 years away from an exit, and it's 60, 70, 80% of your net worth, then you better darn well start to be much more contemplative of positioning your company to hit the maximum valuation you can, and don't get greedy. Don't try to squeeze every last dime out of it and kind of exit at the peak. You want to exit as you're ascending that peak. That's the ideal time to exit. And people that think they're going to figure it out on the fly rarely have great outcomes. You really need to surround yourself with people that know what they're doing and can help and facilitate that final curtain call, and make sure that you get a standing ovation when you walk away from the closing table and that bank transfer hits your bank account. It can be a great and exhilarating thing. And I can tell you from experience, from talking to the hundreds of stories that have been shared on the podcast, there are some real heartbreaking stories out there where people on the last lap, after decades of building something, drop the baton, and they have very disappointing results. And it's all avoidable if you just, it's not rocket science, but there is an art and science to it. And if you follow a methodology, you can optimize the value of your business, and don't wait to the last minute to do that. That's my takeaway for today.
What resources would you point people to that are, sitting here scratching their head going, oh, I didn't think about the exit and monetizing it, but I don't know where to start. Where would you point them?
Well, at the sounding of self-promotion here, a great place to start is to just listen to all the stories of other people that have exited. And then as you listen to all of these stories and things of that nature, you need to start building a team of people that can facilitate the exit. That's where if I would have had something like the podcast to listen to that I could go through and in 15-minute segments hear a transaction of how it unfolded and what the takeaway was to that transaction, good and bad, and I'd listened to dozens, if not 100 or two of them, it would have definitely enlarged my perspective of the things that you need to be aware of. And so that's what I would recommend, quite frankly. And then look around for advisors to help you. Don't try to do it yourself. It's too complex. I don't care what size your business is. And there are a lot of stories you can share about the difference between a do-it-yourself type of exit and one that has been carefully choreographed and executed on. The difference is night and day.
The team that you had mentioned, who's on that team? I'm assuming some sort of advisor. Are there other people that comprise that team that you're referring to?
Yeah, I think that you need someone that on your team that is at the financial component that can take care of that. That may be your own CPA or CFO inside of your company, but you need someone that can tee your company up financially. You need to identify in advance someone that specializes from the legal side of things in mergers and acquisitions or business, a business attorney that's familiar with, the process of selling businesses. You don't want your brother-in-law as a divorce attorney handling this. And believe me, there are people in real life stories of how that actually happens. And you need some sort of business broker, M&A advisor, investment banker, someone like that. And then after the fact, you really need someone if you're going to exit and this is your final act and that money is going to hold you over and do your retirement. You need some financial advisor, wealth manager, someone that can, shepherd you through the intricacies of tax and investments and things of that nature. Because if you exit well, you're going to have a lot of liquidity, and you want to make sure that you've structured everything to optimize your tax situation and everything else. And don't wait till after the fact to address the tax issues either.
So for the people who want to come and listen to the stories that you're curating, what's the best way for them to connect with you and kind of hear the podcast?
A couple of things, you can just go wherever you get your podcast. It's Business Exit Stories. You can go to businessexitstories.com to the website. I have a little report that I prepared on how to increase the value of your business and as much as double it. And you can get that report and download it. It's an easy read and some good perspective. It's just Business Exit Stories /report. And you can just download that report, and that's a good place to start.
Awesome. Well, great connecting with you today, Marvin. Appreciate you being on the show and sharing your perspective.
Well, it's been fun. This has been a great chat.
Thanks.